Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a source today that really challenges a basic assumption many of us have about emotional health. If you've ever been told to just control yourself in a stressful situation. Well, this idea kind of flips the script. What if emotional regulation, say in a classroom or even an office, wasn't mainly about willpower, but actually about the physical space, the room itself?
That is the really powerful question here. We're looking at the work of Jaime Hoerricks, PhD, an educator whose own unique sensory profile leads to this pretty radical reframing. She identifies as autistic, alexithymic, which, means often finding it hard to label her own emotions, and a Gestalt processor, sees things holistically, and our mission really is to explore her main idea. The environment regulates before the person does.
Okay, so that means we need to stop thinking about emotions as just this internal psychological thing, like a puzzle inside someone's head. Hark suggests we shift away from seeing emotion as a word a student has to, figure out, and instead see it as, quote, an atmosphere to breathe. That totally changes the conversation, right?
It really does. It moves us away from just behavior rules and towards thinking about sensory design and relational rhythm. It's a big shift.
A shift from focusing on the individual's behavior to looking at the whole system, the atmosphere.
Exactly. Systemic atmospheric attunement. That's the goal. The idea is that the structure, the light, the sound, how people interact has to create safety first before you can expect discipline or, deep learning.
So how does someone like Hoerricks, who's so attuned to these things, actually, read the room? She talks about her sensitivity, the alexithymia, the AuDHD, it lets her feel the space. She senses the relational weather. And for her, this isn't just a nice phrase. She says it's not metaphor, but method.
That's crucial. It's not just poetic, it's practical. It means regulation work starts before students even walk in. She actually describes walking the perimeter, checking things, adjusting weighted fidgets, maybe putting out soft pencils, textured paper, things for tactile needs, or even just opening a door or window if the air, as she puts it, feels thick with unspoken things.
Wow. That phrase, thick with unspoken things, that really lands. It suggests the group's collective state is, physically present in the room. So if the room is a kind of living nervous system, then what we call misbehavior might not be about the kid's intention at all.
Often not. It could just be a response bubbling up from that atmosphere.
Right.
Hoerricks has this brilliant analogy. She says, pretending regulation starts inside the person is like mistaking the thermometer for the climate.
Ah, okay, I get that. You wouldn't blame the thermometer for the heat.
Exactly. You'd look at the environment causing the heat. So if a student's dysregulated, maybe the room needs regulating first.
Okay, and that leads directly into a pretty sharp critique of, traditional classroom management, doesn't it? Hoerricks talks about the ghosts of behaviorism, the clip charts, token economies, point systems, all that stuff.
Yeah, she's quite critical because those methods are all about transactions, right? Perform this, get that. And she argues they basically ask kids to trade authenticity for approval. It reduces learning to just performing. She puts it bluntly. Token economies smell of manipulation disguised as motivation.
Because they assume the kid can comply, and if they don't, it's just lack of motivation. Not that maybe their system is overwhelmed.
Precisely. The system ignores the nervous system's actual state. And there's this key flaw, mistaking order for actual safety. Hoerricks argues behaviorism gets stillness confused with self-control.
So you get a quiet room, but it's not peaceful. It's just contained.
Right. Containment, not peace. And that unease, it doesn't just disappear, it just kind of vibrates under the surface. Which means the next time something stressful happens, the reaction might be even bigger because that energy had nowhere to go.
That makes sense.
And, there's research supporting this view. Folks like Delisio, Casalaginola, and Bucati, they looked at student dysregulation, especially with neurodivergence like ASD or ADHD. They frame it not as defiance, but as data, like a signal the environment isn't feeling safe anymore. So regulation becomes about reconnection.
Reconnection. Okay, so if we're moving away from compliance, what does that actually look like? How do you practice reconnection? The source talks about teaching as co-regulation in motion. What's that about?
Well, it shifts the teacher's role. You're not just managing kids, you're actively regulating the shared emotional space. Johnson, Guevara, and Preeves talk about this educator self-efficacy in co-regulation. It's recognizing that the adult's nervous system is always interacting with the kids. It's a shared physiological loop. You're constantly sending signals, even non-verbally.
So the teacher becomes like a tuning fork for the room's rhythm.
Exactly. That's Hoerricks' term. The job isn't managing disruptions one by one, but tuning the whole group's tempo. So she might intentionally slow down her speech, lower her shoulders, let silences hang a bit longer, using her own body to signal calm. And often the room kind of naturally follows that rhythm. It's called entrainment.
Right. Like tuning into the same frequency.
Yeah. And for the teacher, this demands a lot of self-awareness, like nervous system hygiene, she calls it. It means constant conscious micro movements,
Well,
pausing, noticing your own voice pitch, breathing before you jump in, adjusting your stance so you seem open, not intimidating. It's all part of building this architecture of safety.
that sounds incredibly demanding, that constant self-checking. It requires a kind of humility you don't often see emphasized in teacher training. But how do you know? Like, how do you distinguish that atmospheric feeling? Is the air thick, or am I just having a rough morning myself?
That's a really critical point. And Hoerricks addresses it. She talks about burnout not just as being tired, but as the collapse of that attunement. When you're depleted, you can't tell your own stress from the room's stress anymore. So that self-reflection becomes vital. It's almost an act of resistance, ensuring your own state isn't accidentally making things worse for everyone else.
Okay, so the teacher is the human tuning fork. But the source is clear. The teacher isn't the only regulator. The room itself needs tuning. Let's talk about what Hoerricks calls architectural attunement. If the teacher handles the inner world, the room handles the outer.
Exactly. The physical space itself communicates. Through the hue of its lighting, the density of air, the reverberation of footsteps and chairs. She calls designing this intentionally nervous system engineering, basically designing the space as an act of care. And this lines up with other research like Tamblyn and colleagues who see early childhood spaces as ecosystems where the environment is like a co-educator.
Okay, nervous system engineering. What does that look like in practice beyond just, nice furniture? Give us some
Yeah.
concrete examples.
Well, one key thing is intentional division of space based on sensory needs, like having a warm side of the room with softer indirect light and maybe a cooler side with more natural sun, perhaps harder surfaces for certain kinds of work. And crucially, seating isn't fixed. Tables are set up for different tempos. A quiet corner for logic games, maybe? An area for louder, collaborative stuff? Another spot for focused building or coloring? The idea is students can drift toward the tempo that matches their state. Choice becomes the regulator. No fixed seats.
That sounds amazing, really.
Yeah.
I trust. But I can hear some teachers thinking, how do you manage workflow, group projects? Doesn't that kind of fluidity lead to, well, chaos sometimes?
It leads to a different kind of order, is how Hoerricks would frame it. An order based on self-knowledge and choice. She argues management actually gets simpler because the environment absorbs a lot of the friction. If a kid needs to move or fidget, there's a space designed for that, so they're not disrupting things in a space that isn't designed for it. The fluidity prevents chaos. It doesn't cause it. And another big piece, having things like plushies, fidgets, stim toys just available on desks. No need to ask permission.
Right. Not treating them like distractions, but like tools.
Exactly. Extensions of safety, she calls them. Bridges between body and environment.
That reframing is huge. And this architectural attunement, it even extends to transitions, because those can be flashpoints, right?
Oh, absolutely. Transitions are often stressful. So instead of harsh signals like loud bells or flickering lights, which can be really jarring sensorially, the cues are gentle, rhythmic. Maybe a shift in the teacher's posture, a slow sweep of the hand, music that gradually changes or fades. It lets the group move together, like one body finding its next shape. It's predictable and calm.
It sounds like this whole philosophy is deeply integrated, care woven into everything. Yet the source also seems pretty wary of how these ideas get adopted by, the system.
Yes, very wary. Hoerricks has a strong critique of standardized social-emotional learning, or SEL, programs. She argues that often the bureaucracy takes the powerful language of care, empathy, co-regulation, and basically waters it down into compliance checklists. It becomes about metrics, dashboards, tracking progress.
That's a serious concern, that the language of trauma-informed practice gets used, but the actual policy ends up defining safety as just the absence of visible distress.
Exactly, which forces students to just perform being calm. They might be taught breathing exercises, sure, but the system isn't really looking for genuine processing. It's looking for quiet. It puts the burden entirely on the student to appear regulated, no matter how stressful or unsafe the environment actually feels.
And that leads to this feeling of surveillance, right? Where care language is twisted into monitoring. The source mentions pressure to report effective progress, using cameras or data to track engagement.
It demands proof of emotional compliance, which, according to Hoerricks, is the opposite of real care. True trauma-informed practice, she argues, should redistribute power. It demands relational repair, insists on environments that are inherently accessible and safe by design. Safety defined by belonging, not by how still kids can sit.
Safety defined by belonging. That's a powerful benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
So pulling it all together, the goal isn't individual virtue or performing emotion correctly. It's about creating a collective rhythm,
Yeah.
an ecology of trust.
Yes, the core question shifts, not are they behaving, but are they safe? Are they known? Do they belong? And as we touched on, the source emphasizes that the educator's own reflection, that nervous system hygiene, is absolutely essential to keep that ecology healthy.
It really culminates in this vision the source presents, aiming for communion, not compliance. Schools designed like living nervous systems that can breathe and recover together. Sanctuaries, really.
Yeah, the architecture of belonging made real, where the space itself helps everyone heal and connect.
So we started asking if regulation was about the space, not just the person inside it. And this deep dive into Jaime Hoerricks' work seems to strongly suggest, yeah, the architecture, the shared rhythm, they're like the first responders for our well-being. It's a fundamental shift, isn't it? From demanding control to designing attunement.
It is, and it definitely makes you think beyond just the classroom. If our physical spaces, our sensory worlds are always regulating us, consciously or not, what unexamined architectural attunement or relational rhythm might you be imposing, maybe without even realizing it, on your own workplace, your community, even your home? What subtle messages is your environment sending? That's something to really chew on.